there's excitement for what's next. There's also, sadness for something coming to an end that you really appreciated and really grew a lot from. And that kind of final feeling of that being over in some ways is very overwhelming.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Career Therapy Podcast. Today we're kicking off a new series called Life After Layoff. And today we are joined by John Thomas Lang, the head of marketing at Amount. And he's got a great layoff story and recovery to share with us to kick off this new series. So John, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Hey, it's great to be here. And thanks for having me. I'm really excited to speak with you today.
Absolutely. I'm excited as well. We always like to kick off these podcasts with that infamous job search question of tell me about yourself and see where people take it. So John, tell me about yourself.
Yeah. So my name is John. I'm originally born and raised in Denver, Colorado, moved here to Chicago about 12 years ago to actually pursue music and went to music school here in the city. And then kind of found myself in this Chicago tech startup scene and really kind of found a foothold within building and scaling marketing efforts and teams and specifically kind of on the content side. So the last 5 years have been me really focusing on that and enjoying the ride here. So that's kind of a little bit of background about me and kind of where I'm at now. But I think for me, my kind of goal in this whole thing is to combine that creative background that I've had and bring that to these businesses and really help to scale their efforts effectively.
That's awesome. And so how did you go from music into marketing? How'd you make that transition?
Yeah, I think for me, I came out of music school kind of ready to go and ready to pursue music full time, and kind of realized quickly that was going to be a lot more difficult than I had hoped for, and realized at the same time kind of that I wanted to pursue this kind of business mind that I have as well. And so I was able to kind of get some good experience with a few companies early on, a few years after I graduated college, and really just they kind of let me drive the ship in a lot of ways. And that was super helpful for me to just kind of get thrown in and start learning things. And so for me, it was a lot of luck. It was a lot of effort. It was a lot of kind of right place, right time. But at the same time, there was just a lot of people behind me that really encouraged me along the way and said, hey, keep going, keep pushing. So for me, that was kind of the natural transition. And I think too, with marketing and specifically in the startup space, that creativity is so important. And so, for me and my background, it's something that just kind of comes naturally for me. And even just being able to improvise on the fly, whether it's on a campaign or, iterating as you're testing and learning something, all that kind of derives from my background in music. So I use it every day. And I think once I kind of started to realize that employers were actually kind of interested in that background and that it wasn't really a mark on me, I started to really embrace that and kind of lean into it. And that's really part of my offering, I think, as my career continues to develop.
I love that. Yeah, leaning into it and really, taking the best bits of it and bringing it over. And I think music really does translate quite a bit. That creative aspect really does translate to marketing because it is about understanding audience and understanding emotion and understanding flow and things like that. So I'm really excited to dig into that a little bit more, as well as the idea of luck. I think a lot of people talk about luck, and I'm curious about, where luck played in and where maybe we give luck too much credit, because I have a feeling you probably put in a lot of effort through all these transitions as well. So let's jump into the layoff story. So tell me,
Sure.
Give us the framework. What were you doing? Where were you working? If you want, as many details as you want to share. And how did that day look for you?
Yeah, that's a great questions there. So I was working at a company called G2.com, which is formerly G2 Crowd. And that day, I think, was in early December of 2019. And there had been some, obviously some things that were kind of leading towards seeing that, okay, maybe we need to make some reductions here and certain goals not being hit. And I think a lot of us kind of felt that, and where I was situated on the team was kind of in a very kind of innovative role in trying to drive new channels and new functionalities within the company. So it's kind of a natural fit for myself and a few members of that team to kind of be a part of that. So that day was very interesting. It was a lot of different emotions. I think there's excitement for what's next. There's also, sadness for something coming to an end that you really appreciated and really grew a lot from. And I think the biggest thing for me was just the people aspect of it. And you get to know your teammates and get to know these people around you that you work with every day, and really understand like what makes them tick and kind of how you can best collaborate with them. And then that kind of final feeling of that being over in some ways is very overwhelming. So there was a lot of feeling around that. There was a lot of just kind of, I wouldn't say surprise, because I don't think I was necessarily surprised by it, but I think there was just kind of a general feeling of kind of shock that that's how it went down. And, it was my first experience with that. So it's definitely something that kind of came out of nowhere.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know when I went through, my layoff, it was one of those things where you kind of knew it was coming. You sort of saw some writing on the wall, but then when it actually hit, you're always like, oh my goodness, that came out of nowhere. Was it one of those, I think one of the things that's so interesting for people who have either just gone through a layoff or people who are worried that they might, because, the world is still a pretty interesting place with COVID going on right now, is sort of that, how will that news be broken to me, right? How will it be a text, like a bad relationship, or will it be an email, or will it be a face-to-face or Zoom, I guess, these days? Do you feel like there was anything that the company did well in breaking that news that you would maybe encourage other companies to do, or, that you really appreciated?
Yeah, I think everything was very clear from like what their goals were in this and who was impacted, how it was going to impact myself, as well as, teammates that are still remaining on the team. So that was cool to see the transparency. And then I think it wasn't necessarily something that they offered, but it was something that I kind of forced when we were in the meeting, which was kind of a 360 feedback, where I kind of spoke up a little bit about some things that I'd like to see improve across the company, specifically to my direct manager, and then to people on the people team as well. So I think like my goal with that was just to try to kind of hopefully help whatever would happen in the future, of saying, hey, here's some feedback on how this happened, and some things that I think we can all improve on. And then with that, obviously I asked that same thing back to me, which is, hey, what's your advice for me going into this next role, wherever I land next? So I think that's really important for companies, as well as any sort of member of the workforce who's going to go into a meeting like that, is to make sure that you are able to kind of get what you need out of it for that closure in that sense as well. So I know a lot of times it can't be anticipated, and today with Zoom meetings and the way that's all structured, it can really kind of be very abrupt. So it's hard to do that in that moment, but I would encourage people, both from the company side as well as members of the workforce, to make sure that they're able to get that closure in that discussion. I think that's really helpful for both sides.
Absolutely. And was yours face-to-face? Was it on Zoom? Was it a like midweek, end of the week? What was the whole circumstance around it?
Yeah, you know what? I think it was a Thursday, if I remember right. We were all still in the office, and actually we had our kind of holiday gift exchange that day for our team. So I was walking in with a gift for one of my teammates, and thankfully I was still able to get it to her. So we still got the gift out, and that was good in time. But yeah, I would definitely recommend companies, if they're going to do a massive reduction in force, to make sure there's no parties going on that day. But yeah, so I think I think it was anticipated in that sense, and I kind of knew what I was walking into that day. But there was 45 of us that were impacted that day, so it was kind of a revolving door of teammates walking up and then walking back down with their papers, if you will. So it was an interesting day, I think, for everyone. And as I reflect back on that, it was it was hard for everybody, all of us that got let go, because we were really in the middle of building something special. But it was especially hard for those teammates that were left there to kind of pick up, right? And when you lose 45 of your teammates, that's a huge blow. And I'm not quite sure if they've been able to really recoup that. But I think that's a big challenge for any company kind of looking at this right now.
Absolutely, yeah. It's tough on the people who have to leave, but it's definitely tough on the people that have to stay. All around the board, it's a difficult decision. And I think one of the big things is to have that empathy for the company as well, right? They're not doing this to be jerks. They're doing this because they're in a hard spot and they're trying to make hard decisions. And unfortunately, layoffs is one of them. And it's something that, almost everyone's going to go through at some point in their career. So we might as well talk about it and learn from it. So I really appreciate you sharing your story here. With that 360 feedback that you got, that you had asked for, was there anything that you learned about yourself or learned about your work at that time that you were able to then take and apply into your job search or into your next role?
Yeah, definitely. I think, everybody, when you get that type of feedback, no matter what space you're in, be able to absorb it. It might not be that moment, but maybe later you reflect on it and really see what was the root behind that. And for me, what I think the best feedback that I and maybe I did a little translating this into my own side, but I think for me, it was the best feedback I got was like, you need to always be proving what you're doing and what the ROI is of your efforts. So even if you're in a role where it's a lot of experimentation and it's a lot of testing and learning and iterating on things, you have to constantly be showing what impact that's making on the broader business. And so for me now, as I, kind of step into a head of marketing role where there's going to be a lot of strategic experimentation, a lot of different things tried in the market, it's always so important for me to show why this matters and not just how we're going to accomplish it, but why we should and what that means behind it. So that was really probably the most impactful thing that I took from that.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that when we're building our careers, when we're going through these times of change and all this stuff, one of the things that I notice is everyone feels like they should be reacting in a certain way or should be doing something different than what they're doing. When we go through something like this, there's a wide range of reactions. I almost found my layoff comedic. I was like, I went out to dinner with my girlfriend and we were like, I'm getting laid off tomorrow. I know it. And I'm like, let's laugh and have a dinner. But then the inevitable emotions come rising up, right? So I'm kind of curious, when you got home that day, what was your next step? Like, how did you process the layoff and how did you start bouncing back? What was that maybe next day, next week, next month? What did that look like for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. That day, actually, there was about a group of 5 or 6 of us that all went out to brunch right after. So that was a healing meal right there, I feel like, and for all of us, and got a lot off our chest that day. So that was great. And then I think after that, I just went home and kind of reflected on things and really tried to sit in that moment and understand kind of the broader picture as well as more, look inwardly and see kind of where I can go from there. And, I just kind of felt it. I felt words come up that I wanted to share. So I just kind of immediately put something out on LinkedIn and Twitter. And that actually really helped me. It kind of springboarded me for the next week or so with, meeting up with old connections and kind of better understanding how I can get in front of some of these co-founders and leaders in these startups in this community. So
what did you end up posting? What did you put out there?
It was just kind of a reflective kind of look back and thanking all my teammates and everybody that, had an impact on me at G2. And, I think for me, the amount of growth that I went through, I was just there for 10 months, but everything that I learned, everything that I picked up, the friendships that I gained out of that experience and the colleagues that I had from that were so valuable. And I think I just wanted to reflect that. And then obviously that's just kind of my personality. I'm not going to, necessarily come out here and start,
wagging a finger.
Yeah, exactly. So, for me, I try to keep it positive and, I knew that a lot of my good friends and teammates were still there trying to build what we were all trying to build and just kind of wishing them luck and everything. And, something like that has obviously a dual purpose, right? It helps to get things off your chest. And then it also kind of helps you to make people aware that, hey, I'm available and ready for that next adventure. So that was a big part of it. I'm a marketer, so I always want to have a call to action with everything. And for me, that was, hey, I'm ready to go. Let's take this to the next level. Whoever's ready, let's start talking. So, I think for that next week, I actually ended up driving back home to Denver. It was a week earlier than I was going to for the holidays, so I extended my vacation a little bit. But while I was out there, it was really productive. I think I had 4 or 5 calls a day with various founders, various hiring managers, recruiters, and really just trying to get my name out there and let people know that I was available. And Over that, I think I stayed out there through the new year and then came back to Chicago and had probably 10 to 15 interviews and kind of just went from there and narrowed it down to 3 or 4 spots. And then I ended up at a Mount, which I'm really happy I did. And I think took a total of about 6 weeks, I think, to get into the new role, which I started in early February. But those were great 6 weeks. I think for me, like, obviously growth is a lifestyle in a lot of ways, and personal growth is huge. And those 6 weeks were great for me from a networking standpoint, from just a confidence standpoint of seeing like, oh yeah, I can do this, no matter what happens, like I'm going to be okay. And that's really something that after a layoff is like really important. And whatever you land in, whether it's, you go to a new company or whether you start to do something on your own or freelance, you just got to understand that every single path that you're taking, there's growth there. And that's really what I was trying to understand during that time and really get it now and see as I look back on it. And then, I had some friends recently lose jobs and just trying to give that same advice of, take the time now. Don't wait, get it out there. Let people know that you're available if that's what you want to do and start hitting the pavement. That's really what I did right after. And it worked out. So, everyone has their own path, but just make sure on that path, you're growing towards something.
Yeah. And I think it's great advice. And I think it's, it's good to hear because so often there's a lot of shame wrapped up in a layoff. I know I'm trying to remember exactly what I did. I don't think I did any sort of public post about it. I told a lot of people personally, and I went off and did my own thing. But there's this sort of sense of, shame that can arise that causes us to hesitate to reach out to people, hesitate to post that thing. And, maybe some hesitation is legitimate. Again, everyone has their own path, of course. But at a certain point, putting yourself out there and being real with people and opening up those doors, I think can be incredibly cathartic, it almost sounds like, and helpful. And I'm curious, you were part of a large group, right? Do you feel like that made a difference in how you were feeling after, knowing it wasn't just like a fired for performance or something like that? It was a bit of a group thing, and you maybe even had other people to look to for inspiration, or other people to look to as, I almost think of it as like bumpers. It's like, I don't want to go too far that way, and I don't want to go too far that way. I want to just get that strike zone, right? Was there anything that you saw in how other people reacted? Not, pointing fingers or calling anyone out, but was there anything that you saw that you're like, ooh, they should maybe reel that in, or maybe they should push it a little bit harder? Was there anything out there that you saw that like helped you stay in a positive space?
That's a good question. I think not really anything publicly, but I think, in private conversations, there was definitely things that kind of kept me going. But overall from that, I think that the thing that I really saw with the group of us experiencing that was just a massive solidarity between all of us and really trying to help each other out and saying like, hey, this opportunity didn't work for me, but let me introduce you to this recruiter. And, I remember there were a few roles that I was looking at that just kind of didn't fit for what I was looking for. And I was able to kind of pass them off to other people and have them interview and kind of keep that connection going. But as far as like how you handle it, I think there's always examples, right, that are a little cringe, and you kind of look at it and you're like, ooh, I don't know if I would have gone out and said that. But didn't see much of that, which I think is good. But at the same time, there was a lot of people who just stayed quiet. And I think you spoke to the shame, and I think that's really real. And honestly, it kind of comes in waves. And even like when you're out interviewing, you kind of like feel that shame again when you're talking about it in some ways. And then in other ways you kind of don't. So it creeps up on you. And even like I found myself kind of in the interview process, kind of like trying to better understand how I was feeling about where I was at as well through these interviews, which was kind of an interesting game to play. But I think what you speak of there is very real. And I would encourage anybody, like, if you're laid off, and even if you are let go because of performance, like, understand that shame is going to be there. Don't necessarily trap it and leave it out, but identify it and then move on to the core of that and try to figure out what's driving that truly. And I think if you kind of can work through that, then that becomes a lot easier. But it's inevitable, and it'll be there for sure.
Absolutely. And that solidarity, I think that's such a key thing of tapping into communities. Um, there's a sense of isolation that starts to happen after a layoff, and unless you're actively putting yourself out there. I mean, what's nice about having a job is it forces you into social situations sometimes, right? You kind of have to deal with a coworker here or there, or go to a happy hour or something. But especially in the work from home world that we're in right now, there can be a real sort of turning inward that happens with folks. And I find that, that can quickly spiral into a bad situation. And you mentioned a couple of things that I thought were really interesting. You said you wrote that post not saying I need a job, someone give me a job, right? You wrote that post being grateful for the people that helped you get to where you are already. And kind of putting it out there is sort of that dual purpose with that marketing call to action. I think it's so great that you called that out, right? Because I think we forget sometimes, like we forget that we should be pushing in some sort of direction. And networking for a lot of folks, they don't do it until they have to. And layoffs are definitely a case in which you have to. And then they feel like it's inauthentic. It's not, it's with a dual purpose, so it can't be good or something like that. And I'm like, why can't it both be, you reaching out to someone out of genuine interest and authenticity and being sincere, but also you're trying to build your career, as is everyone out there. So I'm kind of curious, what has been your perspective on networking? And maybe we can pull in some of your music background, because I feel like the music industry and the way that people network in the music industry is fascinating. So I'm kind of curious how you sort of develop that skill, because a lot of this stuff, we develop these skills before the layoff, right? And then we bring it into the new situation. So what do you think has been the most helpful thing from your music background as, in this job search process, as well as in your new role?
Yeah, so I mean, I think everything with music and with what I'm doing now and in the job search is about collaboration. And so what I really bring from the music background and is something is like, you don't burn bridges, right, with people. And you never know when they're going to need you for a show. You never know when they're going to need you for a recording. So you just keep those connections open, and you support each other. The music community is really tight in that sense of people supporting each other's independent releases and trying to get things out there. So, I've kind of been raised in that and supporting the teammates that are around you. So transitioning into this marketing world that's just kind of been a natural aspect of it, right? And I think being a marketer, and specifically content marketing, which is where my background lies, is you're forced to make these connections through your job. And, you're asking for backlinks, you're asking to guest post on their blog, you're reaching out to them on Twitter and building these communities. And so when things happen, you're already connected with these folks, right? So that's the best way to keep that going is just take some time, whether it's every week, every month, however much you want to devote to it, and just make sure you're keeping those connections alive. Even whether it's just a text or a simple like on a post, they're going to remember your face, they're going to remember your name. And then, the thing that people kind of forget is all this stuff is algorithmic, right? So if you're interacting with them on LinkedIn, they're going to continue to see your stuff. So the continuing building of community is really important. And it's almost more important when you're not looking for a job, because that's the point where you're not necessarily asking for anything, but you're providing something, right? And so I think that's really important for people. And it's hard when you're starting in a career to really build those connections. And I know I've always kind of had the benefit of being somebody who's not necessarily afraid to get up on stage or get in front of people or, speak to strangers. And I think that helps, but there's ways, if you're not that type of person, to also build and kind of develop these bonds throughout your career. So get creative with it. Don't be afraid to introduce yourself to people and get your name out there. And then obviously I think the core of that all is confidence and kind of understanding your value, right, and your worth. And if you know that, it's going to make it a whole lot easier.
Yeah, I think that's so key is to keep going even when you're in a role, so that when you find yourself in these moments, you can really leverage and kind of, I don't know, leverage almost seems like the wrong word, but like fall back on those connections that you've been fostering over all that time. Now, you said it was about 6 weeks, right, between laid off and landing your new role. Is that right?
Yep.
And what was your approach to the job search? So clearly you posted that message, you started reaching out to people, you said you were traveling a bit. Did you use job boards? Did you not use job boards? What was your sort of, um, bounce back strategy in that way? What was your approach to the job search?
It was an all the above, to be
All the
honest
above.
with you. One-to-one connections. It was looking at job boards. It was, daily getting on LinkedIn and looking through jobs that fit kind of in my path. Reaching out to folks that I've connected with in the past, seeing if there's any openings coming up. And I think for me, like, one of the big things is, and this is just kind of speaks to the power of networking, is there was a CEO and founder who I interviewed with, I think 3.5 years ago. They ended up going in a different direction with a candidate, but I ended up keeping in touch with him. And immediately after the layoff, he actually put me in touch with 4 other founders who I got in an interview process with immediately. So, this was somebody that we didn't really stay connected very deeply, except for me just, cheering on the company and kind of rooting for them from afar. So those connections really matter. And in that 6-week period, I think I tried to get in at least 10 to 15 applications a day if I could. I mean, it was just numbers, it was looking at it and saying, how can I just kind of put out this wide net and see what kind of pulls in? And I was, mostly looking for more leadership roles at this point in my career, and was kind of focusing in on that, but really kept everything open and took calls and interviews from a bunch of different roles, and more specialist stuff versus more generalist roles. So I think the key is just put yourself out there, put up numbers, and then you're going to get that funnel is going to build itself, right? And you're going to start having interviews, you're going to start doing assessments, you're going to start doing all these things. So and one thing I will say, a lot of companies these days want to kind of see your value and your work up front. And for marketers, it can be a lot easier because we typically have a portfolio of work ready, right? And so if you're a marketer and you don't have a portfolio ready yet, take some time, make one. It can be as simple as something in a Google Drive that just shows a lot of your work. And then when you're ready, you send that out to people right away, and they can see the value of your work before they even speak to you. So that's just kind of a recommendation I'd have there. And I think that the key is just numbers. You gotta get yourself out there. You gotta apply. You gotta take a look at everything and all the possibilities.
That's awesome. And a lot of folks struggle with that. When they get laid off, you're in a job, it gives you a schedule. It gives you a time to be there, a time to go home, a time to go to lunch and all that stuff. But then when we get laid off, we lose a lot of things, right? We lose the company's reputation. Was our reputation, right? We lose the identity of that title, which was our title. And we, lose that sort of sense of security, financial and, physical even. And I think when so much kind of just disappears overnight in a lot of ways, people have a bit of an identity crisis. And they go, oh no, I'm just a quote unquote job seeker. That's my title now, apparently. How did you hang on to your identity, your marketing identity between roles? Were you learning anything, building anything? Was it all just networking? How did you not lose that sense of self? Because you had a very quick turnaround. And so I'm kind of curious, did you have a really fortified identity going into that job? So you had a nice sort of separate look at yourself. I'm kind of curious, how you sort of view that identity piece of things.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the best way to put it is that I don't view my identity through the lens of my career. I view my identity as who I am as a person. And so for me, that really helps to inform every aspect of my life, right? So when there are challenges in my career, in my personal life, the core of my identity understands what I value and what I seek in that value. So when you lose a job, that's just a part of your life, right? That's not your entire life. And I know that's so hard for a lot of us, especially in this millennial and Gen Z generation, where we're just pushing so hard to just get a bite at the apple. And for so many of us, the facts are the facts. We don't have the amount of wealth that our parents had at our age. We're not where they were salary-wise. And so we keep trying to kind of fight this. And so we start to build an identity around ourselves as our work. And that can be really dangerous. So what I would encourage folks to do is just know your identity as yourself first, and then how that varies from your work identity. And when you know that, you'll start to see them really marry nicely together, and you'll start to be more natural in work settings. You'll start to not be as afraid to kind of show your personality and be yourself. And then also, when something happens with your job, it won't be as attached to you and your humanity and your soul and you as a human being, right? So it's important to marry those together, but it's also really crucial to have those separate. And that's kind of how I was able to do it and still do it. And I'm somebody who really values work-life balance. And that was something that really abruptly changed for me with the pandemic. And, I think it was 2 weeks in, and I was about 6 weeks into the job and 2 weeks into the work from home. And I just kind of like hit this wall, and I was like, I don't feel any balance right now. Everything's off. And so I had to really take some time to just kind of figure things out personally and better understand how I can find that balance in this new normal, and been able to kind of hit that stride here as we've gone forward. But having that clear separation between your identity and your core self versus who you are in the workplace and what you offer as a member of the workforce is really important. And I would just encourage people to keep those in a healthy place, right? And understand that your identity is not your job. That's the way that you make your means. It's not who you are at your core.
Yeah, I love that. That's so great. And it almost feels like that can be something that comes from the creative world as well, right? You make these really cool creative things and you put them out into the world, but they are separate from you. And once they've detached, they're like floating out there, and other people get to interpret them and make them part of their life.
Yeah, and I'd say, just like to follow up on that, I think one of the things that's really helped me, I went to a music conservatory where it was music all day, every day. And that training and getting told that's terrible and no, you need to improve this and that's not good enough, and seeing people around you that are these just brilliantly talented musicians and knowing you got to catch up to it is really something that kind of helped me with that, and kind of makes me understand and gives me a little bit of perspective now of like, that experience of kind of being told in a very forward way, you got to get better, has really helped me in the work experience. Because now it's like, if I make a mistake or numbers don't add up to what we need them to, or we don't hit goals or whatever, it's a little bit easier to compartmentalize because it's not as directly tied to me as a human being and the sounds and the emotion and creativity that I'm producing. So I think that's helped for sure.
Yeah, I really like that, because it is that almost sort of, impermanence of it, or that constant change. I think a lot of people think of their career as a very static thing. I have my career and then we get laid off. Oh, I lost my career. Oh, now I got to go get it back. And when in reality, it's like, no, it's a practice. I view a career very much as a daily practice of utilizing certain skills, talking to certain people, solving certain problems, and just continually every day saying, how am I going to do this again? What new techniques do I need to bring in? And that sort of practice idea keeps us from getting complacent. It keeps us from getting, oh, I just use Gmail. I don't use the next thing that comes out. Or I just, I'm still on MySpace, or whatever the heck the thing is that someone might be doing. But it, like, every day it's like, oh no, there's new elements to bring into my practice, and probably elements that I need to let go in my practice. And I love that sort of musical mindset that you bring to it, because that is a very sort of daily practice. You never are done learning in music, right? You're always, and I was in a band way back when, in a ska band, and so no one knows the skas, but it doesn't matter. But the like every time you get up there, the song isn't done, it's not finished. You have to recreate it every single time from scratch, basically, even though there's muscle memory and stuff like that. But I really love that perspective that you're bringing to it.
Yeah, and the same thing goes if you're in a sales role, if you're in a marketing role, if you're in a developer role. Anything, you have to continue to get better. If you're a lawyer, you need to better your courtroom presence. You need to better your writing every day, So there's that constant seeking of improvement that's really important. And I know it's hard to say it when you're in after a layoff and you're looking for a job, but it's a great time to add some new skills, right? Pick up something, see what you can learn. Maybe you add something to your stack that makes you more hireable in the future. So I know it's hard in that moment to realize that, but when you can, it can be really special.
Yeah. And that is what people are usually they jump to, a layoff typically triggers some sort of certification or additional learning or an MBA or something. For me, it was launching a side project and all sorts of other stuff. And I think that, taking action is really what we're getting at. It's doing something, even if you're not sure it's right, even if you're not sure it's like the perfect thing, chances are it won't be, but we'll get some sort of feedback into the loop, and that feedback loop is really what matters. So as we get towards the end here, I would love to get a sense of where you're at now, because you went through this whole experience. But in telling that, I would love to know sort of what were all the different touch points that happened that led you to the current role you're in? Because I think sometimes people go, oh, it was luck, right? Oh, I job searched for a few months and then I got lucky and I got a job. And then everyone who hears that goes, oh, well, if I don't get lucky, then I'm just not going to get a job. When I dig into it, I always find out, no, they were waking up every day, putting in the hustle, reaching out to people, doing all these things. So looking back, now that everything is 2020, perfect vision, what were all the little touch points that you could maybe identify that led to the current role you're in?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, if you have a conversation with somebody who's hiring or a founder or anybody within the company that is willing to have a conversation with you, follow up to that. Don't drop the ball there. That's an easy one for you to do immediately. And I think that was something that I really tried to do, was keep those touch points going with every single person I was talking to, thanking them for their time, continuing to share more ideas with that follow up from the conversation. And I was really in a lucky position, and I mean, maybe not lucky, but I think I keep using that word, but I think that I was in a great position because I had a few offers come in. So I was really able to weigh my options. And really what that came down to was I was able to really choose where I thought the best growth for me was next. And so, I interviewed and had offers with 3 great other companies and ended up choosing them out. And really the reason that was the growth potential there and the ability for me to really come in and scale and create this from scratch. And also with this established background of the Avant business and where we spun out of that and came from. So I think the potential and the opportunity, and then obviously the people was key for me. And, hearing the excitement and the voices of bringing on this role and starting to really build out the B2B marketing efforts was something that was really impactful for me in my decision. And keeping those touch points, like you said, is really important. Every time I'd meet with somebody, there'd be a follow-up to it. And, I think for me, there was always somebody who kind of like referred me in or, hey, you guys should talk. And if that happens, thank those folks too and send them something that just like, shows your appreciation, even if it's not something of monetary value, something as simple as a text that just kind of says, hey, thank you so much for that. It was a great opportunity. So I think that's really what I would encourage people to do is don't be afraid to continue to reach out. And especially right now, I've actually been kind of going through this now as a hiring manager and trying to hire up a team during this time has been really difficult because things just change every moment, right? So what might be approved now could not be in a week. So if you're a candidate and you're speaking to hiring managers or recruiters and maybe they're starting to ghost you for a week or so or longer, don't be afraid to reach back out. But like we talked about, reach out with a purpose, right? It's not just, hey, checking in on seeing what the role is. One thing that I was really impressed by a candidate that we actually ended up hiring is she reached out to us and said, hey, here's all this stuff I've been accomplishing in the 3 months since we last talked. And here's the direct tie to return on investment that I've caused at my company. And that really pushed us over the line to say, all right, let's make this happen. Like no better time than now. So, so I think people just keep pushing on the touch points, keep responding. Don't give up on things, especially right now, because these hiring managers, they want to hire people. They want to get a team going. But in so many ways, there's just all these, different hoops to jump through right now with the pandemic. So don't be afraid to reach back out and show that value again and keep pressing on those touch points.
I love that. I absolutely like knowing the ROI of your role and being able to communicate that is so incredibly important. And it also shows that you care about the business's goals above and beyond just, oh, I need a salary, obviously, to live. I mean, everyone does, right? And so that's fantastic. I love that you shared that hiring perspective as well, and really bringing that around. And it sounds like a lot of the ins that you got were through referrals, which we very much find, like 80% of jobs are found that way. So it's great that that's showing in the actual anecdotal stories that we're telling here as well. And I would just, I'd love to just hear from you as we, wrap this up. If there was one thing you could go back and do differently or double down on in your whole experience of going through a layoff and bouncing back, what would that be?
Yeah, so I think I'll kind of break it down as pre-layoff as well, if I may. And it's really drawing along what you're saying with the ROI, and knowing that and being able to show it. So for me, if I could go back and double down on my time before the layoff, it would be to better show and project exactly how we're impacting business goals with the work that me and my team are doing. Super impactful to do that. And I would just encourage everybody who's in a role right now, start focusing on that. It might just be 5 minutes a day. It might be even less, but just start to take a look at that and see how you can better do that. And then during, I think during that point of layoff to landing in the new job, I think for me, what I probably would kind of go back and redo would just be to kind of just like be easier on myself with certain things, so sometimes you might get rejected. I remember there was a company that I really wanted to work for, and we got through a couple interview phases and it just didn't work out. And, that day I think was a disappointment, but it really kind of is always a step to the next adventure. Right. So I think for me, it would just be, be easy on yourself and understand that, things are going to work out at some point. And it may take a while, but ultimately whatever's meant to happen will. And then after, I think when you land in a new role, I think that, it's so key to recognize the wins that happen and really understand where you're making an impact early on. You got to reflect on the losses that you take. You're going to take losses when you land in a new role. It's just inevitable. You got to reflect on those and grow from them. And then, I think if you're somebody who values this side, like, try to shift the culture and try to really move things in a positive direction and take things to the next level. And, it's hard to do that in every single role, but, I really took it upon myself knowing, like, hey, if I'm going to come into a company and take over this marketing initiative and really start to build this program, the enthusiasm has to be there. And so that's been really something that I've tried to double down on as well. So I know that's kind of long-winded and throughout each piece of it, but that would be what I would say I'd go back and do more of.
I love it. And I appreciate you sharing what you're excited for in your next phase, in the next part of the journey, because now you're going to move forward and leverage that into future roles, future promotions, future everything as well. And that's, I think, so important. And so key to keep in mind is that, everything builds on itself, even the downs. We're always adding new things to our repertoire, even if it's a painful thing, even if it's a layoff, even if it's, a span of 6 months where we're just like, what's going on? That's teaching us patience. It's teaching us how to, be kinder to ourselves, hopefully, as you mentioned. And I'll even toss in, learning how to be empathetic towards hiring managers, because they're getting inundated with information and they have their hands tied by bureaucracy and all sorts of other stuff that happens. And so we can be kind to ourselves and we can be kind to others in this process. So, John, I really appreciate you joining us on the podcast today and sharing your story. We're hoping to bring many more of these layoff stories to our listeners to help everyone just realize that this is a process that so many professionals go through, and especially in this time right now. And we're not alone in it. And there are resources and people want to help. That's the key. People want to help if we reach out in the right way. So, John, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Hey there, thanks so much for checking out this episode of the Career Therapy Podcast, Life After Layoff series. If you enjoyed what you heard here and have a layoff story of your own to share, please connect with me at linkedin.com/IN/Martin McGovern, or just look up Martin McGovern on LinkedIn and shoot me a DM. I'd love to have you on the show to share your story and normalize this layoff experience that brings so many people such a variety of emotions and shame and different things that we feel going through the process. I think it's something that most people will experience in their lives, and I want to share more of these stories with the world, and I really appreciate those of you willing to share. If you like what you watched here today and you want to support us on Patreon, you can check out patreon.com/career therapy. And don't forget to subscribe to this on YouTube, like the video if you can, and leave a review on iTunes or whatever podcasting software you're watching on. I appreciate your time and wish you the best of luck in your career.